3x long. Thread is 6/0 brown. Now you can tie it with thinner. I don't have it here, but you can use thinner thread that's made out of Kevlar. The problem with that is there's a tendency, if you pull too hard, to cut the deer hair. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you a very quick demonstration of how to handle deer hair just on a hook by itself, how the spinning process works. And Florin will show you how to do the stacking side of it, because that's what the Mikulak sedge is. It's stacked rather than spun deer hair. So I have a package of pretty nice deer hair. And this, fortunately, is stuff that is, it must be summer deer hair because it doesn't have a lot of fuzz under it. So I'm just going to take a little piece of deer hair out of here. It's not, and one of the things is, don't be too ambitious. Don't great big chunks of deer hair. They say a pencil thickness. Well, I find that almost too much. So there's kind of the, let me get this on where I can see what I'm doing. Can you see me still? What happened there?
We're missing you now.
Yeah, what happened there?
You moved your camera.
No, but it. Oh, I wonder if I hit. Oh, I see what happened. I got backwards here.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yep, perfect.
Good. Okay. So the first thing you got to do with deer hair, if you're going to spin it, and sometimes even stack it, is you have got to get the fuzz out. And that's the purpose of the comb. And what you're doing is you're combing out all of the fuzzy bits. And that's what prevents the hair from stacking properly when you put it in this guy. Tips down if you want the tips to be evened. And then whack it on the surface. And there's your aligned tips of deer hair. Now that's important when you're stacking and you want those tips to show, not so much if you're just going to spin. And then what you want to do is, at least I do, is I hold the clump when I'm going to spin, and I even up the butts. So I'm just doing this over top of my waste bucket. And then I'm going to place the center of that batch right over top of my thread.
Dave, can I interrupt you for just a sec?
Sure.
Just talk about using not your best pliers for cutting deer hair.
The best scissors?
Don't use your best scissors, because deer hair dulls the scissors very quickly. So I always use an older pair of scissors. Or
I don't typically have a problem. I've got the scissors that I've got, these are a Dr. Slick, and these are the curved ones. Yeah. And they hold their edge really well.
Yeah, that's what I've got, but I was told early on not to use my good scissors.
And this pair is a cheap pair I bought that were Pakistani made. These are straight ones. And I don't seem to have too much of a problem, but we'll come to that later, how to trim deer hair. So I'm going to put that right over top, and then I'm going to do a wrap over top of it in between my fingers and pull it slightly to get the flare started. Second wrap, and then as I pull this, I'm going to pull it towards me as I spin around the hook and gradually tighten as I do this. And that's how you spin a clump of deer hair. And I'll do another one in a second here. So you see all the deer hair flares out in a nice little ball. And I'm going to put another stack on here if I was going to tie a bushy fly. So I pull the deer hair back, and then I make a turn in front, a couple of turns in front. And the next thing that comes up is you'll need this tool like this. You can use the tip of a ballpoint pen, anything that goes over the eye. And what you're going to do is put that over the eye of the hook, and you're going to use it to pack the deer hair back together. So it ends up being pushed together. And then we're going to get another clump, another clump of deer hair. Trim that off the hide. And again, get the fuzzies out. Fuzzies and the short hairs. Trim the ends a bit. Again, short ends. And then I'm going to lay that in front of the last clump. Again, once over, flare, bring it up. When you do the second, I try to use the thread to push the deer hair around the hook as I spin.
What number of thread are you using, Dave?
This is a 6/0. An 8/0 would be a little too thin, I think. So that's the general principle. So when you get that done, and I'll just real quick whip this off. And then what we're going to talk about real quick is when you're trimming, this is where the razor blade comes in real handy, because you just gradually saw in here, and you can see it cuts very nicely. It cuts that deer hair off. So you can shape the deer hair with the razor blade. So that's just the quickies, or you can do it with these curved scissors. It gives you allows you a chance to get in there and shape it a little better. So that's the general idea. So that's what the technique for spinning deer hair. So now we're going to go and we're going to start the Mudler minnow pattern. So the first thing is I'll go through materials. Again, it's a 6/0 thread, brown.
Sorry, so just a second here. So that what you just showed us was really for the sedge. It's nothing to do with the Mudler minnow. Is that correct?
No, it's just the technique for how to spin, because we're going to use spinning deer hair on the Mudler minnow, and the stacking principle where you just stack the deer hair on top of the hook. Floren's going to show you that later. So the first thing material outside of thread is turkey feathers. Now what I've done with these guys is I've taken the regular turkey and had it all settled down, and then I've taken a product called Letraset Protector. It's a spray-on product that you use when you're spraying over graphite to keep it from smearing and stuff like that. And you spray the feather lightly with it. And what it does is it keeps the barbules from coming apart. It makes it a lot easier to select bits of feather. Otherwise, the feather tends to separate. So if you can find that spray protectant, it works really well for any of these quill wings. It really does make a difference. It makes things a lot easier.
So what is it against? Protector for what?
It's a spray protector for people that do charcoal and pencil drawings.
Oh, artist supply. Okay.
Artist supply, yeah. So you'll need a matched pair of these. And by matched, it means there's a left and a right. And you'll see there's a curve to it. Now, if you want the curves to go like this, you pick the side of the feather that's got the strongest curve, and they will make a nice shape like that. But I'm going to use the fatter side because it's a little flatter. It doesn't have quite as strong a curve. And I'm going to take, for the tail, let's get some thread on the hook first. So I just start behind the eye, and I will cover the hook with thread all the way back. Take her all the way back to where the barb was, right at the just a hair in front of the bend. And again, where the razor blade comes in handy, I'm going to get a tail. And the tail, I'm going to take a section of this turkey quill. And I'm going to use my razor blade right up against the stem. And I'm going to cut a little less than a 1/4 inch segment and pull off with the razor blade. That's one. And then I'm going to try to get exactly the same one off of the other width off of the other side. That's about 1/4 inch. See, that separates out, goes onto the floor. So then I'm going to match up the tips of these two quill sections, dull side in, heavily marked side out. So you can see them like that. And I'm going to measure the tail as being 1/2 of the shank length of the hook. I take that in my left hand, bring the thread up as a pinch wrap in between my fingers, down the other side, and then I'm going to pull straight down. Put a second wrap in, pull straight down. And you'll see there's... So I'm tying that right smack down on top of the hook. That's a little long tail, but that's okay. And then I'm going to spiral the thread over top of the butts, halfway up the hook, halfway to 1/3 of the way up the hook. Trim it off. What I want is a nice, smooth, even body in front. So I'm going to wrap over top of the butt ends of that to make it a nice, smooth body. And you can see now my tail's sitting up pretty good. Next piece of material is fine gold wire. And this is where you got to watch with your scissors. You don't use the tips. You use way down here. See, these ones actually have a little spot there for cutting wire. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to measure just a little bit past 1/2 of the shank length and wrap that wire down on the hook shank. Bring the thread all the way back again, right to where I tied the tail. The next piece is some gold tinsel. Now, I have the benefit of having some old metal tinsel. This stuff is not the mylar stuff. And you got to be careful with it because sometimes it comes unrolled from the spool and then it gets kinks in it. So you have to be a little careful. I've got a piece, if you don't have a piece without kinks, so it's a little shorter piece. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come up to halfway on the hook, and I'm going to tie the tinsel in by the tip right there. And I'm going to wrap over it all the way back to where the wire is and where the tail is. Bring my thread forward, and then I'm going to wrap the tinsel around the hook in touching turns or slightly overlapping turns. And you can see why when I bound down all of the bits and pieces that halfway up the hook, how it makes for a nice, smooth body. You don't get any bumps or lumps in it. And then when I get to the bitter end here, one more wrap. I'm going to wrap over top of that tinsel, cinch it down. Now, because this is metal tinsel, it's not going to come unwrapped, so I can trip it right close to the hook shank and take that little bump and bind it down. I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to wrap it the opposite direction to make a nice rib. Oh, don't do that. Cut that wire a little short. There you go. And then over top. And I'm just going to bind the wire down good. And then use that same spot on this pair of scissors to clip it off. And put that tip wire down. Okay, now, underwing is squirrel tail. And this one is going to be reasonably sparse. So I'm just going to take a few strands of fibers off the squirrel tail. And the underwing is just to add a little bit of variation in the wing of the fly, but it's also to help hold the wing up a little bit. So I'm going to measure the length of the squirrel tail to be just slightly short of where the tail of is already tied in. I'm going to tie that down. And trim off the excess. And then right there, sort of just in front of where I tied that squirrel tail in is where I'm going to tie the wing now. So again, with the turkey quill, I'm going to take my my razor blade, and I'm going to go along the shank and take about 1/4 inch of that. And again, with the razor blade, the same sort of thing here. And I'm going to even up. Now, why did that happen? There we go. Going to even up the tips. And now I'm going to measure the wing so it's almost the same length as the tail. Pinch wrap it on. And there he sits. And to make sure the wing kind of stands up, I'm going to take the fibers of these wings and I'm going to kind of pull down on either side of the hook a little bit. And that's going to make the wing stand up. So you see, I just took the butt ends and I pulled them down a little bit on either side of the hook. That made them stand up. I can trim them. Okay, so far so good. Get it there. So now I'm going to bind this down good and put my thread where I've just about middle of where I tied down that set of wings. And now comes the deer hair. And again, I'm not going to take a huge amount, about a little less than pencil size. Cut that off the hide. Get the fuzz out. And I'm going to trim and I'm not going to trim much off the butts because I want to leave these slightly long. You'll see why in a minute. Stack them with the hair stacker in there. My trick with a hair stacker is when you're taking the hair out, just hold it at a slight angle with the butt down, and that will leave you just the tips sticking out the bottom. Grab the tips. Now I'm going to put this not halfway in the clump like we did when I was showing you before, is I want these tips to be about halfway back on the wing. I don't want them to go too far back. Then I'm going to do the spin thing. Once over, pinch wrap, pull down to start the flare. Another time, second time around, and I'm going to push it around the hook. I'm going to take all of that stuff and stroke it back to the back. And wrap in front. Take my little hair packer and I'm going to put my fingers in behind where the wing is just to keep it from pushing everything else backwards. And I'm going to pack that hair back. And then another clump. Want deer hair that's fairly straight, not too curved. Get that off the hide. Comb it out.
Dave, would you consider cutting the tips off the hair prior to spinning, so you end up with more of the butt section of the hair spun on the hook, or is that a bad idea?
Well, so what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to put the tips forward rather than backwards, and this time I'm going to put it so that it's halfway in the middle of the clump. I'm not bother stacking it because I don't need the tips all evened up. And then I'm going to do the wrap around. I'm going to spin that. Work my thread through a little bit to the front again. And I'm going to pack it in one more time. And there's enough room there for me to do another one. So once again, I'm going to take the deer hide, and I'm clipping this as as Florence says, I'm going to crimp this right down close to the hide. You can see right down there, right at the hide. So I have a lot of the coarse part of the hair down at the bottom. Hold it by the tips, comb out. And this time again, I'm not gonna bother stacking it. I'm just gonna swap it around. I'm gonna lay it in there and one pinch wrap, second wrap, and then push it around the hook. I have a very fuzzy looking thing, and I'm getting close to the eye. So use my fingernails to just push it back a hair. Get that wrap in front. And then my hair packer for the third time. Shove that all back. So it all kind of sticks out a little bit at right angles. This is where the half hitch tool comes in. I'm going to use a half hitch around the tool and put it over the eye of the hook. This way I'm not going, when I tie, if I were to do a whip finish, I might trap a bunch of those deer hair fibers down. Whereas if I use a half-inch tool and do about 4 half hitches, that's going to do the equivalent of a good whip finish. And I don't trap a bunch of those fibers in. Get in here. So now, the first thing we do when we trim, and this is where you need the vacuum cleaner or a bucket underneath your fly, is I'm going to take the razor blade and I'm going to come to where the eye of the hook is, and I'm just going to saw. I got the fly upside down now, and I'm going to cut the bottom of the fly off flat, the deer hair flat, right back to the body. Because otherwise the deer hair might get in the way of the hook. And now my little curved scissors. I'm going to go around the fly and kind of at a 45-degree angle, I'm going to clip this stuff off all the way around from the eye of the hook to the back. Stay there. And you can see what's happening here is I'm forming a tapered head all the way around, except for the bottom, which is flat, of course. And when I get there, then I'm going to take these fibers and pull them forward. And you'll see that the tips that when I tied in the first set of tips, because they're shorter than the others, they're still pointing backwards. They're not pointing forwards, because I'm just stroking the really long fibers back. And at this point, I can now go to the side and I can lay down on top of the fibers pointing backwards and trim. Without trimming them, I can trim in between the tips of the fibers that are pointing backwards and the butts of the fibers that are pointing straight up. And that's how we make that deer hair head, that shaped deer hair head, without losing the collar at the back, the points of the collar at the back. And there's a few long ones here that are kind of sticking out. Just pull them out of the way. Oh, there, that guy is gonna have to trim him out. Where There's one. When they did my cataract surgery, I have one eye that they corrected for close vision and one eye that's corrected for distance vision. So my left eye I can use for doing this without my glasses. There we go. And that's Mudler Minnow. Questions, comments? Now I'll have to get the broom.
Looks really good, Dave.
Yeah.
There you go.
Very nice.
So that little trick of tying the first clump with the tips shorter than the butts is what allows you to leave that collar and at the same time be able to trim the butts off in that nice close trimmed head.
But it also means you have to measure your tips carefully there because that's the size of your collar.
Yep. So yeah, that's right. You have to, when you place your first batch of deer hair on, you got to make sure you get your tips about halfway back on the wing is the way I put it.
It sure doesn't look like a fish to me. Like a minnow.
Yeah. You seen the sculpins?
Yeah.
Yeah, I look at them. They're goofy looking fish, aren't they?
Yeah, they have that big fat head, right? And I think the purpose of having these extra fibers that point back is they create that, and the same thing with the squirrel underneath, is it creates that disturbance in the water around the fly that is a bit of an attractor, I think. It's just the movement. You know, that's why I remember when we first started fly fishing that they sold kits with plastic flies. And the plastic flies looked like anatomically correct flies, but they never caught anything because they didn't look alive. And I think, you know, flies that you tie that are a little more ragged and a little rougher, I think tend to perform better in the long hunt because they look like they're alive. They trap air, they move. Anyway.
Dave, you can go down to the dollar store and buy yourself a little tray like this. Look. And it catches all my little feathers and scrap.
I actually have one. Where'd my thing go? Yeah, here. I get it off, but it's kind of attached to my vise. I thought I had the tool here. Anyway, yeah, I've got a little basket that sits under the vise that catches most of it. Where did I put the tool? There. I'll get that out. I can see. Okay, there we go. So this is my basket. It attaches to the bottom post of the vise and sits under the fly. But the way the vise is set up today, some of that trimming missed the basket.
I can see myself working really hard to not crowd the eye on that fly. There's so much up in the front 1/3.
Yeah, you have to, that's why I say you have to stop the body halfway back and then put the wing right in front of the body. And that leaves you a little less than half to put the head of the fly on. Yeah, so the proportions are, again, the tail is about half the shank. And then from where you've tied the tail in, you go halfway up the shank with the body. And then you tie the wings on top of that. And the wings go back kind of just slightly shy of the end of the tail. And then when you put the squirrel tail, I try to keep that just shy of the end of the wing. And then these fibers are about half the wing. And that came from actually watching the Davy McPhail's video on how he ties one that's like a size 14. And let me tell you, that is going to be a challenge. There you go.
I would almost think that in a size 14, you could just as well fish some kind of a standard generic wet fly pattern.
Yeah.
Rather than go through all this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting watching if you've ever done looking for videos of guys tying flies. If you can find the Davy McPhail ones, they are really good. He is an absolutely outstanding tyer. And he makes it look so frickin' easy. That's the sad part.
He makes it look easy because he's Scottish.
He's Scottish, yeah. He's just been doing it for decades, right? Yeah. Oh, you know.
So no head, Dave. So no head cement. Those half hitches are enough to keep that thing together, eh?
For me, you can use head cement. You can put a drop of head cement. If you look at who else, the other guy that I saw the video that did it, one of these, he just used super glue, and when he got to the end, he was able to push everything back out of the way, and then he put a little half an inch of super glue on his thread and wound it on, and that did it.
Yeah, I've seen another trick used, which is at the end, but you have to have the glue the right consistency to put a drop on the thread before you cut it off.
Yeah, yeah.
And let it just slide down. I've seen the trick done. I've never tried it myself.
But yeah, I've done it too, where on some patterns where you just can't get at the head, or you don't want to glue everything down at the head, it is super glue on the thread works really good. You can put it on the thread and then just a few wraps of the thread with the glue on it, and that seems to work.
You can use conventional head cement as well. That way it's often a little easier. Super glue spreads dramatically rapidly and it hardens quickly.
Yeah.
Another trick I use often if I'm worried about crowding the head and worried about closing the eye of the hook with any kind of head cement, is that I will drag the eye through some Blistex.
So which?
Blistex, lip balm, so that it fills the eye of the hook.
Huh.
And then I never worry about having the glue close the eye of the hook. After the head cement is dried, I just poke it with something and it just snaps out, leaving the eye of the hook open.
Here's another trick.
Yeah, no, it's normally with a little bit of feather and so on, or whatever. But I just,
these things you get cheap at the drugstore.
Yeah, yeah, you can buy 1,000 of them very cheaply in the dollar store. But I just find the Blistex. I mean, I just keep it open, and I before I tie any flies, I close the eye with the Blistex.
So that's just the regular lip balm, right?
Any lip balm, anything to just a
lip balm. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. You just make sure that the eye of the hook is filled with it.
That's a brilliant idea because sometimes I don't get to finish a stick of that stuff, and it goes off a little bit rancid. So this is a good use for those old ones rather than throwing them away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I put too much head cement on always, so I ended up just drilling out the eye with the bodkin.
Yeah, you can do that too, but the threader, the floss threader works pretty good too, and then you have that, you can use it to thread your bobbin. So that's it for me. Lauren is up for his.
Okay, thank you. So here is, I was inspired by that great idea. Was it Ron? Was it you? The alternating wings.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here is one with the middle wing made out of the same material as I used last time for the CFF. So just, you know, synthetic white stuff. Yeah. And so this is the fully modified version, right? So both synthetic wing and a bullet head type thing, or at least the pulled back hair. So this fly is
right away is that the wing is higher, and it'll remain high. And I think that's really important for visibility if you're twitching it through the waves.
Oh, this should be super visible, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess one could do, I guess the front wing I wouldn't, because I want to keep the head shape and everything. So seems to me the ideal thing to be doing here is either you put it for this middle wing here, or for even both, do 2 middle wings of synthetic as an alternative, and then do the front and the tail end of the fly with hair. So anyway, I'll try some variations. That sounds like a very good idea. So I'm kind of looking forward to putting these things on water. By the way, this is a fly that was originated for this traveling sedge, but I found it to work as a generic attractor pattern. So instead of using, say, a stimulator, or use it in a situation, I was once fishing a local pothole lake here in the fall, and the wind was blowing, and I had some of these things with me, and there were lots and lots of grasshoppers blown on the water, and I didn't have any grasshopper patterns. I just put on a Mikulak, and I had a really nice fun afternoon. So I would call this, yeah, it's a traveling sedge pattern, but it's also pretty good general attractor pattern. You can basically just put this on and fish with it. And in a lot of streams, this could be the only fly you need for a whole day. So
I like to have a squared off head, a head like an elk hair caddis. You know, I want it to push the water, not to slide through the water. And I'm hoping that will cause it to twitch from side to side as I'm retrieving it. I'm talking about the traveler sedge hatch. The traveler sedges are rapid movers in the water, and they dart from side to side as they're skittering across the water. So I like a squared off head.
Like this?
Yes, like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the reason I tried the alternative head on the fly was I was trying to get that unruly hackle a bit under control, because this is a very easy fly to tie. Otherwise, it's basically think of doing 3 elk hair caddises in a row. Essentially, that's all you're doing. The only tricky bit of the whole process is to put the hackle on at the end. Don't crowd the eye like I did here. That's a relatively bad example. And the issue is that whenever you wrap hackle on something that's very thick, it just comes out as more of a spiral tie rather than a nice straight sticking out, fiber sticking out nicely from the hook shank. But anyway, so let me go ahead. So these are some pre-tied flies, and you've probably seen the pictures that I already sent. And
yep, got the pictures, thanks.
I'm sorry?
Yep, got the picture, thanks. Photo. The 6 of them. Yep. Okay,
so the hook I'm using for this is a slightly curved shank here. This is the Daiichi one, And it's a nice hook. I prefer it. Some recipes call for the tiemco. Some are just saying just use a long shank straight hook. I find the mustads to be relatively thin wire. The dry fly hooks, like the 94-831 or whatever the number is on those. And I find the tiemcos to be a little bit heavy wire. This is a little bit lighter wire, but I think anything would work. It doesn't really matter. So put a bit of a thread base on, and then we go to the first clump of hair. So what I have is a big chunk of elk, and I have a recipe here that says 6 to 12 fibers for the tail. I just take a thin clump, so everything that Dave said earlier still applies. So just take a thin clump of the stuff, don't go too thick, and trim it at the base of the hide, nice and clean. Just use the, basically to clean the hairs, all I do is I just use my fingers and the stuff just comes out. So hold it nicely by the tips, and anything that's, you know, a shorter fiber or any fuzz just goes away. And then I feed all of this into a hair stacker of the wider variety. Here I'm using, I have a tiemco, and tap it and get my tips evened out. Okay, so now I'm going to do one more moment of cleaning here. There are fibers that usually stick out at wrong angles and stuff, so just pull stuff out. Make sure this is still clean. Okay, and measure here the tail the standard way, so kind of gap at the hook length and attach it at the point where the thread is hanging. So here, transfer, so I'm holding it in my right hand, I'm transferring, holding with my left hand, and the thread is going to be running through my fingers. I don't want this stuff spinning at all. You can see how it has a tendency to spin. I don't over tighten. I just go a few wraps forward, make sure that I'm happy with what I've got here. It looks good. Okay, and now I just discovered that I probably need a different pair of glasses to do this properly. I was like, why am I not seeing this well? Okay, this is way better. Okay, so then I'm going to go forward with a bunch of loose wraps. This is going to keep the hair from behaving badly towards the eye of the hook, and I'm going to leave myself some room here. So about 3 eye lengths or so is what I like to keep available, because stuff is going to be piling up. And now when I go back, I bind this nicely to the hook. Okay. And as I get close to the tail, I hold firmly onto the hair before I get any closer to where my initial tying in point was. And now I can be as tight as I want with this, and things will flare up, but will stay nicely on top of the hook. And this thing now is firm and solid. You can't twist this thing off the hook, even if you wanted to. No glues, no funny business required. Okay, and I'm just using regular uni-thread 6/0. That's again, the finer thread is okay if you've got the delicate touch, but you risk cutting hair with it, so that's usually not a very good idea. Okay, so now first little bit of dubbing comes on. So this is olive seal fur from Superfly in this case. I have stashes of the stuff. I've been nervous for a long time that somebody's gonna change the rules and we're not gonna be able to get the silver anymore. So I've been squirreling it away. Just a small amount, probably put a little too much right now. Small amount of this olive stuff is greenish. These bugs are actually quite vividly colored. So an alternative to this is a very kind of traditional looking fly here with this olive seal fur and the elk hair. It looks kind of very, very sober. But you can go a little wilder with this, with a bright green synthetic dubbing. That fly works well too. I've tried that sort of coloring as well. So okay, I think I've gone far enough here. So, and time for the next. Yeah, this looks like a royal mess here on the screen. This is the disadvantage of tying on using a video camera. So second clump of hair, about the same size as the first one. Clean it up. I just use an old can of coffee here as my cleanup. This is a mess. No matter what I do or what I put near or under the vise or anything, I just tie a bunch of hair flies when I have to tie hair flies. Then I give the whole area a good solid vacuuming. I don't know if, and I guess Alberta's pretty dry too, so if you work with these things, it's a lot of fun with static electricity, I guess. Line the tips, and then now we have to start being careful about where these things go on the hook. So the idea is not to go all the way to the back to get like a square tail, but go kind of like half to the half point of where the tail is, right? So the tying point, again, each clump is going to be tied wherever I left the thread hanging. So when you do the previous step, you always think ahead, where is my next tying in point? And that's where the thread is going to be hanging. Okay, so again, same idea, transfer to the left hand, do a soft loop here, start. At the same time, I'm moving the thread forward, I'm moving my fingers forward. You can see I can move my fingers pinching forward, right? So by doing this, I keep the hair on top of the shank and it's behaving properly. Whoops. I shouldn't jinx it by saying things. And the moment I tighten, you can see how it's flaring up. So gotta be careful with that. All right, I don't want to overbuild the body here either. So I'm just going to trim at an angle like this. So it's nice and close to the hook shank. So then I go forward, clean up. And this does two things. One, it cleans up. And the second is those hair butts get trapped very solidly by the thread. So this thing isn't going anywhere at all. And now go back to where I tied in, okay? So now this is starting to build the fly. Again, a little bit of dubbing. So this is kind of, you know, repeat. I've lost my seal fur. No, there it is. Okay, a bit more seal fur. I'm just putting minute amounts. This is going on top of everything and it's not really adding any bulk. It's only adding some fuzz here and color. So there we go. There's the next one. And then one more. Cut. Clean the hair. Stack. I wish we could just like, okay, skip to the next step, but I have to go through all of these. The line, and then same idea here. I'm going forward, but I don't want to go. So I'm lining this up here, right? So here's on top. Whoops, careful, I didn't tighten enough. See how it was already starting to move? Back off a little bit just to make sure that I don't have any adventures here with cutting thread and so on. 2 hairs on the bottom. Just make sure move my thread out of the way by pushing it with my finger so it's nowhere near where the scissors are. Okay, then go back over the butts. This is going to secure this very nicely. Okay, one more round of, and the other thing to be careful with this, and here's an example of me not being very careful with it. Oops, I could have put a little bit more dubbing, oh well. And the second thing is I went back and I cinched a little too hard and it just lifted the wing up. So you decide if you want a lower wing, when you go back, you don't cinch too hard. If you want to lift the wing up, you go and you do a tighter wrap, and that's going to flare and lift the wing up even more. Okay, so that's another option you've got. Dubbing. So this is the final and front wing that's going to come next. More of the seal fur. I suppose one could use a dubbing loop to get it a little tighter. So it's a choice of whether you want it to be a little bit fuzzier. And so if you just dub the seal fur like this without a dubbing loop, it tends to get even fuzzier with use. Okay, so now I'm at the point where I can do the front. Okay, so now another little clump of hair. Trim. Just jump in with questions if you have questions, because it's easier for me to answer questions as I go along.
So you're going to put a fourth one on here, right? So the fourth one is the front wing. The third that you've already got on is the back wing. The last
right.
one is
So
the
I have the first wing is like a tail.
Yeah.
Then there's a second wing in front of that,
mm-hmm.
or first wing, depending on how you want to count. Then there's a third, which is this middle wing. And then the final one is going to be this front wing. Yes.
So 3 wings and a tail. Okay.
Yeah, and as you go to smaller hook sizes, at some point your hook gets small enough that you will drop one of these middle wings. Okay, so instead of having, so you still keep the tail, but instead of having 3 wings, you only have 2, because that's all you can fit on at that point. Okay, so this would be about here.
What's the average hook size for this type of fly?
Size 6 is a good one for the real traveling sedge, which is a lake fly. these are the guys that make these huge, they're big, they're the size of this hook. They're just gigantic bugs. They're like the size of salmon flies kind of stuff. And this would be the size that I would be tying for that purpose. But there are other caddises that I think this is being used for. So then that's where you go for smaller sizes. But some of these lake dwelling caddises are on the large size.
Last year when we were at Community Lake, there was a hatch of cinnamon travelers. They were quite a bit smaller than the regular traveler hedge, the rare one. So what size hook would you use for them? Maybe a 10?
10, possibly 12.
Okay.
At that point, I mean, when you get below 10, you're almost into elk hair caddis range. So I think an elk hair caddis would do just as well, and you just fish it in the same way, right? So if you have the running sedges on the water, you just cast it out there and you do a fast retrieve and see what happens.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you.
Now to get the neat head here and get the crowding out, what I like to do at this point, so I've attached this, I leave the butts untrimmed for now. Then I lift the butts and I build a little bit of an underhead right here. The other thing I do at this point, and this is strictly optional, is I like, as an insurance, I like to do a little bit of a whip finish underneath the head. That it just basically builds up and gives me extra insurance should anything happen to the thread on this fly. I normally don't use glues, so this thing is only relying on the thread and the knots. Okay, so now that I've achieved that, when I trim the butts, they'll stand up nice and proud, and they will definitely make a disturbance. Okay, see there's more fuzz here that I pulled out, but that doesn't matter. Okay. And now we come to attaching some hackle. So I have a piece of hackle here that's already trimmed. So what I do is I just trim the fibers with the scissors. Can you see that? At the end, so that those little fiber butts are going to be really good for holding the hackle. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to attach this thing at the same point where I've attached my hair wing. If there's too much left of that butt, I just trim that off. And then I go and, whoops, bad job. Gotta try again. I cut a little too much. I was a little over enthusiastic there, I guess. Okay, that should be better. And now I have to be careful that I wind this hackle between the two clumps of hair that I'm facing here. So three wraps of hackle. I've experimented with longer hackle. I think shorter hackle is probably better. And then, so I tied this at the back. I've been winding forward, and now I have my thread, and to give it extra strength, I just take the thread back through the hackle, pushing the hackle itself back. This reinforces the hackle quite nicely. And then trim it here close to the wing. So now I've got the hackle, I've got a hairy mess I'm looking at. And now it's time to trim the head. So just take the hair and trim at an angle, kind of standard elk hair caddis procedure. And here different people have different preferences, but here's the head of the fly. And now I can finally whip finish this thing. So I take my whip finisher, and again, don't have to be super careful about not trapping hackle fibers because it really doesn't matter much. And I like to do 2 whip finishes with the tool instead of using glue because I find that it works very well. There are weaknesses in my tying usually elsewhere, not in the whip finish knot. So I can get by without glue. Okay, so this is the fly, and now you can see the head is a mess. And the only thing that remains to be done is to trim the hackle. So the idea for this fly is that these are just side pointing legs. And what you want is you want to cut the hackle top and bottom. Okay, so I haven't done a very clean job of this. And then on the bottom here, it's a little tricky because the fibers are sticking at funny angles, and it's kind of hard not to cut into the lateral fibers. But the idea is, and I'm afraid I just did that. I've lost the I've lost the legs on one side. I have to retie this fly. I'm not too happy about it. So as I said, to me, this is the worst part of tying this fly. As you can see, I haven't paid really good attention, and I completely cut the legs on one side, right? So the idea is to have these things as kind of like outriggers to both sort of stabilize the fly and add to that wake that the fly makes when you pull it on top of the water. Okay. So this is the
Sometimes
the fly.
when you're doing that, pinch the ones you want to keep and cut the others.
Yeah, there are different ways of doing this, and that's why I started to resort to trying a bullet head on this, because it does 2 things. One is it relieves me of the need to trim on the top, which is a bit tricky. And second, it gives me more fibers. It basically splits the top fibers and pushes them to the sides. So then I have more hackle fibers to start with. So when I trim the bottom, I still have plenty of fibers left, sticking left and right. And I think I'm still getting enough of a wake by doing that, but that's something to be experimented with, I guess. That's it. And then there are variations on this. This is not my best example. I'm looking at this and it's like, yeah, okay. It's, but I'm not going to tie a second one because I don't think we have the time for that.
The trout won't care. They'll go for it anyway.
Oh, if those flies are hatching, I have no doubt about that. But that's there's a set of including the synthetic wing here. And there's a set of these guys, and yeah, it's I picked it up from Phil Rowley's book, which is something that probably most of you already have. The fly patterns for still waters. And Dave posted a link to to Phil's web page with this pattern, and I also have it in an old book called Flies for Alberta that came out of an Edmonton fly shop.
Oh, Reg Denny's book.
Yeah, and it's in Reg Denny's book, and Reg gives there are a few more bits of information. It pinpoints the origination of the fly to 1975, and it looks a little bit different. I mean, this picture is really not very clear, but it looks a little bit different from what. So here's a color version. This is the fly labeled D4.
You should stop your screen sharing for the moment so we can see.
Oh, didn't I? Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go.
I thought I was showing you stuff here. So this is this D4 pattern.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit different. It's more like it's building up a big wing, like the hair tips go a little bit further back, whereas Phil's pattern is a bit pushing the wingtips forward and getting a different, rather than one huge wing on the fly, it gives the impression of a little train of wings. So that's
I have a copy of Reg's book as well, and there's some really interesting patterns in that thing.
Yeah, I know. There's and this is where I have this instructions with elk hair 6 to 12 strands.
Mm-hmm.
And there go the suggested size there is the same thing, size 6 to 12, and then everything else pretty much the same. They recommend tightly dubbed olive seal fur using a dubbing loop.
And Reg would have got that pattern information directly from Mr. Mikulak himself, I would guess. Because he knew him.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is elk hair, the light color with stacked tips. Proper placement of the tail and wings would give a realistic sedge silhouette. So you can play with that. And the fly goes back to 1975.
Mm-hmm.
And the pattern outline here is comprised, so this is what Reg is giving us credits. The pattern outline is comprised of excerpts from information supplied by the originator, mm-hmm. and Mr. Bruce McKenzie of Calgary. Actual originator's fly was provided by a collector, Mr. Mike Roop from Calgary. So this is something that came out of Calgary apparently.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Well, thank you.
It seems like you guys already know this fly, so.
Not at all. Never seen it before. Seriously, never done it. Thank you.
There is that's a rapidly retrieved fly, and ideally with a bit of a ripple on the water, and the strikes are just unbelievable. But if you have the unfortunate circumstances that the water is like glass, and the water is crystal clear, a trout will suddenly become very, very selective. And it's one of the most amazing things. Like the day before, you just had to think, it can't get any better than this. You wake up early, you head out on the water, and it's just, so, and you see fish rising. Yeah, and seemingly all over the lake, but they won't go after yours. And what they're going for is an emerger.
Oh, yeah.
which you just cast out and leave. Maybe twitch every once in a while. And that will catch the occasional fish. Whereas the Mikulak, for some reason, they in the absolutely flat water, it doesn't travel like a traveler does.
Yeah, on wind, I mean, on with the ripple on the water, I've had really good success with this, just basically trolling rather than bothering to retrieve.
Yeah.
So put the electric motor on and you don't go too far before you have to stop.
Oh yeah, it's a
good. Sounds good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good. Thank you. Any suggestions for next week? Let me know Tuesday.
I am mouse.
All right, just a minute.
It is getting to damselfly season.
Is it? Hmm.
They're often easy flies to tie, the damselfly.
So I'm going fishing on Saturday with Ron Duncan, who's left us, and Sandy.
That's a nice one, Darren.
So the three of us will be gone.
Okay.
Up the interior.
Okay.
That is the most fun.
There's a mouse with a
mouse.
I tied those for bass on the surface, and
yeah.
But there's a lot of wind resistance to these things.
Short leader.
You know, Dennis, where they say that is good. I've never experienced it, but is in Alaska for huge rainbow trout, that mouse fly.
Well, Michael, I used it exclusively almost in Kamchatka.
Ah.
And I mean, some days were 30, 40 nice trout on a mouse. And it's the most fun because they just hammer.
Labrador brook trout too.
Ah.
Brown on Stoffer Creek.
So just to say again, Ron, Duncan, Sandy, and I will be gone on Saturday because we'll be up in the interior fishing.
Good luck to you.
Our hearts go out to you, John.
Yeah.
Such a sad news. I wish you well.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to Peter Hope Lake, at least to start with, near Merritt.
Learn some chironomids.
Have a great trip.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks later.
Thanks for your time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.